Good evening and welcome to Capitol Report on NTD Television. Here's what's coming up. A government stimulus check could soon be coming to your bank account. What President Trump says about the savings brought in by the Department of Government Efficiency. How will newly confirmed Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick manage President Trump's plans to balance trade? We'll hear insights and analysis from the director of American Institute for Economic Research's Sound Money Project. President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy exchange accusations while the U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine and Russia is in Kyiv. Mayor Eric Adams in, quote, a very unusual situation. A federal judge in New York deliberates on the request to dismiss his charges.
This is Capitol Report, live from our global headquarters in our nation's capital. Here's Steve Lance.
I'm Jack Bradley, in for Steve Lance tonight. President Trump confirming his administration is discussing giving 20% of DOGE's savings back to American taxpayers. He's also seeking to attract new foreign investments for the U.S. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Iris, good evening. What are some of the key takeaways from the president's remarks?
Good evening to you as well, Jack. So tonight, President Trump was speaking at a meeting of business leaders gathered in Miami, and some of them were sponsored by Saudi Arabia's government. And President Trump, while touting about his administration's work so far, especially when it comes to DOGE, says that there are indeed discussions within his team about potentially giving 20% of all DOGE savings back to American taxpayers and another 20% to use to pay down the national debt. Watch.
There's even under consideration a new concept where we give 20% of the DOGE savings to American citizens and 20% goes to paying down debt, because the numbers are incredible, Elon.
And Elon Musk was also there tonight. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, claims that it has cut at least $55 billion in government spending so far. And this week it also published a list of over 1,000 federal contracts that it says has terminated. And that's to go along with additional cuts it says it has made through, for example, cutting federal workforce, canceling grants, as well as detecting fraud. And tonight at this event, President Trump also touted about the tax cuts that he plans to give Americans, as well as new tariffs that he says he will impose on foreign goods to, of course, bring that wealth in. And speaking to these world business leaders, President Trump says he comes with one message, which is that America is back and open for business. Watch.
I come today with a simple message for business leaders from all across the nation and all around the world. If you want to build the future, push boundaries, unleash breakthroughs, transform industries, and make a fortune, because you want to make a fortune. Most of you have already made a fortune. I don't want to say that. There's no better place on earth than the current and future United States of America under a certain president named Donald J. Trump. I think that you're going to do very well.
And the president is also touting what he calls economic optimism that is soaring inside the U.S. Due to what he calls the election victory. And he says, for example, the rising stock prices, as well as the hundreds of billions of new investments coming to the U.S. are a proof of that. Back to you.
Iris, the president's also signing new executive orders tonight. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So we just got new details from the White House about the new executive orders that President Trump is planning to sign on his way back to D.C. on Air Force One later tonight. One of them, the White House told us, will be to stop taxpayer subsidies for going to illegal immigrants. Specifically, it will require agencies to stop federal funds from supporting legal immigration and what they call sanctuary cities and policies. And also it's going to strengthen eligibility verification process to prevent those benefits from going to illegal immigrants. It also estimates that taxpayers have been paying up to over $451 billion since 2021 for illegal immigration. And another executive order that President Trump will be signing tonight will be to, quote, shrink useless agencies. And the third one that he's signing will be to, quote, quote, rings in government overreach and brings deconstruction of an unconstitutional administrative state. And that is part of what they say the DOGE effort to shrink the federal government and, of course, rein in on that power the federal government has. Back to you, Jack.
Thank you for that update, Iris. How will the President Trump's layoffs of federal employees and his tariff plans affect the U.S. economy? Joining me now to discuss is William Luther, Associate Professor of Economics at Florida Atlantic University and the Director of American Institute for Economic Research's Sound Money Project. William Luther, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure to be here.
Now, are the federal employee layoffs going to impact job markets and the economy at large?
Well, it's certainly going to, affect the labor market there in D.C., but in terms of the broader U.S. labor market, very small effect here. We're just not talking about enough people to have an effect on the total unemployment rate for the nation. What you're seeing is that some government workers are losing their jobs, and of course, some other local workers who perhaps work in restaurants that those government workers used to eat at or provide other services for those government workers. Some jobs in those areas are going to perhaps scale back a bit as well. But in terms of broader effects, you shouldn't expect much. Indeed, as that labor is reallocated, as those very smart people who are working for the government in D.C. Go get jobs elsewhere, right, we should see those economies expand and employment opportunities increase there. So again, probably not enough to have a meaningful effect on, say, the headline unemployment rate, but no reason to think that this is going to be detrimental in the long run either, even to a small degree.
Well, what kind of severance package does the government provide fired employees?
One of the things that President Trump has done is offer relatively long runways to government workers. So, for example, if you just read the headlines, the president and Elon Musk and the DOGE team is kicking folks out of these jobs. They're getting rid of them, cleaning house. But in fact, often what they're doing is giving folks 8 months worth of runway. That is 8 months of pay to help them transition to a new job. It's kind of interesting to think about in the context of what economists call a transitional gains trap. That is, you have these vested interests, government employees who are currently in those jobs, and they have an incentive to fight very hard to keep those jobs. But we may want to engage in some downsizing. So how do you do that? On the one hand, you try to make it as attractive as possible for those folks to leave. On the other hand, you need some political support because some of those folks are still not going to want to leave. They're going to be on the nightly news talking about how the president or Elon Musk has cost them their job and harmed their families. And as those sad stories stack up, the American public thinks, whoa, hold on, maybe this is not very good. And so the president needs to get political support. And the way to do that is to speak very tough on these employees, talk about the waste, fraud, and abuse of the government, really rally the support of the American people that these jobs are not things that those former government employees are entitled to, but instead are coming at the expense of taxpayers. So it's very interesting to see how the president and Elon Musk and the DOGE team are navigating this transitional gains trap, a very tricky problem, and they're doing so by both being very harsh with their public words and being very accommodating in their actions in terms of severance packages and such.
President Trump plans to impose tariffs around 25% on auto imports, semiconductor chips, and pharmaceuticals by April. Why are these sectors significant, and how could this impact interdependent sectors?
He wants to raise some revenue here, I think. And he wants to raise some revenues in ways that have what economists call low deadweight losses. That is, they don't discourage us from producing too much, right? Every tax, and a tariff is a tax, every tax discourages some valuable exchanges from taking place. If the goal of a tax is to raise revenue, you want to raise a lot of revenue at a very low cost of production. That is, at a very low discouragement of of production. Remember the broader context here. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act is set to expire. The president very much, it seems, doesn't want that to expire. And in order for that not to expire, he's going to have to raise some revenue elsewhere and perhaps also cut some spending, right? And so if he is able to raise revenue using tariffs at a relatively low discouragement of production cost, and if that facilitates him continuing the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which otherwise would raise some revenue at a much higher discouragement of production cost, then he's getting the same revenue or something close to the same revenue, but he's actually encouraging production on net by choosing the lower deadweight loss generating tariff. So I think that's why he's going after these industries and not others.
I want to discuss the newly confirmed Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's trade policy, with the Trump administration planning to use tariffs possibly as a bargaining tool. How can Lutnick balance the impact on the U.S. economy?
If the president did not want tariffs at all, then it would be hard to use tariffs as a bargaining tool. On the other hand, if the president is committed to imposing some tariffs, then he can effectively go to a country and say, look, we're going to raise some tariffs, but it doesn't have to be on you. And that becomes credible because that country knows that the president does, in fact, want to raise some tariffs. So these two things go hand in hand. On the one hand, he wants to raise some revenue. On the other hand, he wants to extract as much gains as possible from the countries that he's not levying those high tariffs on. And so, I think that using both of those tools in concert makes a lot of sense from a strategic standpoint.
Now, China's notoriously not playing fair in global markets. They have non-market business practices. Historically, the United States plays a stabilizing role in global economics, but its influence has been waning in recent years. How could Lutnick change the dynamic with China?
The idea that China is not playing fair in global markets and we should tax them, I think this has a very broad appeal. But we also should recognize that those earlier Trump tariffs that were intended to, they were directed at China. They didn't actually discourage a lot of trade with China. For the most part, those Chinese businesses were able to pass on those costs to Americans, and most of that trade just continued on. So I think this is a very difficult thing to do, and I certainly don't envy Mr. Lutnick for having the job of doing this. You can recognize that China steals intellectual property and perhaps doesn't treat some of its neighbors very well, but it's very difficult to use the carrot or the stick to convince them to do otherwise, and it's even more difficult if you're trying to do that without imposing big costs on Americans.
William Luther, thank you very much for your insight here today.
My pleasure.
The special envoy to Ukraine and Russia is in Kyiv today. That's as President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy exchanged strong accusations. NTD's international correspondent Aaron Pazdar has the Ukraine update.
Special envoy to Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, is in Kyiv this week. He already met with some high-ranking officials on Wednesday and is scheduled to sit down with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy as well.
General Kellogg is already in Kyiv. He has met with Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, our intelligence and special service heads, and the head of my office. Our meeting with General Kellogg is scheduled for tomorrow.
Kellogg's visit to Kyiv comes after he was part of a U.S. delegation that held talks with Russian counterparts in Saudi Arabia. Zelenskyy has repeatedly said the U.S. and Russia can't agree on a peace deal without Ukraine being involved in the talks. Russian President Vladimir Putin said this on Wednesday.
President Trump told me during our phone call that the U.S. assumed that both Russia and Ukraine will take part in the negotiating process. Nobody is excluding Ukraine from this process.
President Trump took to social media on Wednesday, addressing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Trump wrote that a modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion. On top of this, Zelenskyy admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. Trump also called Zelenskyy a dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast, or he's not going to have a country left. Because of the ongoing fighting in Ukraine, the country skipped its presidential elections after Zelenskyy's term expired. On Tuesday night, a reporter asked Trump if Ukraine should hold presidential elections.
We're the leader in Ukraine. I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating. Wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, you know, it's been a long time since we've had an election?
On Wednesday, Zelenskyy responded to Trump's comments.
Since we are talking about 4%, we have seen this disinformation. We understand that this is coming from Russia. These numbers are being discussed between America and Russia.
Zelenskyy added that Trump is living, quote, in a Russian disinformation space. But Trump says that the need for elections in Ukraine is not coming from Russia, but rather from the people of Ukraine and other allied countries. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
The Transportation Department under President Trump has revoked its approval of New York City's congestion toll. It charges drivers entering Manhattan below 60th Street. Here's how New York Governor Kathy Hochul responded.
In case you don't know, New Yorkers, we're in a fight. We do not back down, not now, not ever. I don't care if you love congestion pricing or hate it. This is an attack on our sovereign identity, our independence from Washington.
The Department of Transportation gave approval to the program under the Biden administration in late 2024. The Trump administration says it's terminating the program for two reasons. One, the congestion toll provides no toll-free option for drivers. And two, the toll aims to raise revenue for public transit rather than reduce congestion. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said in a statement, quote, New York State's congestion pricing plan is a slap in the face to working-class Americans and small business owners. It impedes the flow of commerce into New York by increasing costs for trucks, which in turn could make goods more expensive for consumers. Trump commented on the termination, quote, congestion pricing is dead. Manhattan and all of New York is saved. New York's transit and bridge authorities immediately filed a lawsuit challenging the decision. They accused the Trump administration of targeting the congestion toll for, quote, blatantly political reasons. A federal judge today carefully considering whether to dismiss a federal indictment against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Judge Dale Ho held a hearing on what he called a very unusual situation. NTD's Arlene Richards has the details.
New York District Court Judge Daniel Ho carefully considered Wednesday whether or not to dismiss a federal criminal case against Mayor Eric Adams. Just before Ho approached the bench, Adams had solemnly walked into the courtroom, flanked by his attorneys. Trump-appointed acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove appeared for the Justice Department. At the outset of the hearing, Judge Ho said he understood that he has very little discretion to decide whether the indictment should be dismissed or not, and that under federal rules, the government is the first and best judge of whether a case should be dismissed. Nevertheless, he said he needed assistance on sorting out what is a very unusual situation. The Justice Department requested the dismissal based on their understanding that prosecutors were abusing the criminal justice process by charging Adams. Bove said the case has an appearance of impropriety and that continuing it interfered with federal national security and immigration concerns, explaining that Adams' security clearance needed to be restored and that he needed access to sensitive information related to federal immigration policies. Bove also said the case was interfering with Adams' ability to run for mayor. Judge Ho questioned the attorneys on both sides, as well as Adams, about the scope of the dismissal and whether granting it would be contrary to the public interest. He also asked if he should consider third-party filings that accuse the attorneys of engaging in a quid pro quo agreement or providing X in exchange for Y, to which they both denied. Bove and Adams' attorney Alex Spiro argued that the request was very routine, noting that it was not opposed, and that these types of requests are often not challenged, as in this case. Bove acknowledged that charges could be brought against Adams at some future date as the investigation would be ongoing, but said that he did not make the request in bad faith. Both attorneys expressed exasperation as the judge continued questioning about the circumstances surrounding the case. Adams stated under oath that he understood the terms of the dismissal and he did not have any objections, adding that he didn't commit a crime. Judge Ho said he understood that his role is quite narrow, but that he would take time to properly exercise his discretion. The hearing ended without a decision from the judge. He didn't say when he would issue a ruling. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Coming up, why did President Trump step into the competition between the House and the Senate budget bills? What is the most likely outcome? We'll hear analysis from a tax policy attorney when we return. And lawmakers rally with workers outside the Health and Human Services headquarters. Jason Blair has their message to the Trump administration when we come back.
If joint pain from aging is slowing you down, Omega XL can help you get back in the saddle, just like it did for John Walsh.
Today I'm here at my ranch exercising some of my polo ponies. Got to be really fit to ride these horses. So as you get older, it gets tougher. I was starting to suffer some of that business, and then I ran into somebody who said, look, you should try Omega XL, and look what it's done. I feel better than I've felt in the last 30 years.
I'm Reve Walsh. I'm John Walsh's wife. I ride fox hunters, and sometimes I'm in the saddle for 3-5 hours at a time. A lot of work out here.
I wouldn't have been able to do this. Muck a stall, throw hay, do all the things that needs to be done on a ranch a couple years ago. But Omega XL gave me the ability to get back in the saddle. It works great.
Once you try it, you don't want to be without it. It makes a huge difference.
It does. Take it every single day, and you know, there's a benefit. It's made you a lot nicer to me.
If you've been living with pain, it's time to get this special offer, the Omega XL, the joint health supplement that millions have trusted for more than 20 years. Omega XL, it's sourced from the green-lipped mussel, exclusively found in the pristine waters of New Zealand, some of the cleanest waters on Earth. Omega XL, it's natural, drug-free, and it's backed by more than 40 years of clinical research that show it really works. Try Omega XL today. Pick up your phone and call the number at the bottom of your screen right now for a special offer. Buy one, get two free. 2 bottles of Omega XL plus Vitamin XL D3, a value of more than $100. But call today and you pay only $39.95. That's a savings of more than 60%. Plus, it's backed by our 60-day money-back guarantee.
Try it. You got nothing to lose.
Call or go online right now to get this special offer. 2 bottles of Omega XL plus Vitamin XL D3 for only $39.95. Call now.
August was born 3 pounds, 9.8 ounces. When I first saw him, it was like a whole range of emotions, joy, sadness. There's gonna be obstacles. You're gonna feel like, why is it happening to me? And you're gonna realize you're not the only one. There's no perfect way. Your own way will be the perfect way. You're gonna protect it with all your might. Just seeing him happy, it's just joy, you know? I look through his eyes, I can envision like a whole future with him already. To throw the first football to him, give him ice cream for the first time. Oh man, he can smile now. I'm happy because he's advancing in life, you know, he's growing. Being a young dad, it's not giving up, it's shifting. My life is now devoted to his life.
Welcome back. I'm Jack Bradley. President Trump has weighed in on his preferences for congressional Republicans to kickstart the implementation of his agenda. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has more on this story.
This Wednesday, the Senate confirmed Kelly Loeffler to be the head of the Small Business Administration, and the Senate's Committee on Health, Education, and Labor heard testimony from former Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer, who's Trump's pick to be the next Labor Secretary. Her testimony solidifies support on the Senate Republican conference.
And so the pro legislation would have actually made state right work laws illegal. It would have overturned all the state right work laws. She was for that. She did in the hearing admit that now she's not for that. that. And this is the question whether this is a sort of a deathbed reversal or whether or not she actually truly is for this. We're going to think about our answers.
But it was a Truth Social post by President Trump that took senators by surprise and changed the day's agenda.
On the budget resolution, President Trump has weighed in, and his preferred option is the House's version. Do you have any reactions to that? Does that change the Senate's dynamics?
Well, probably should. I mean, I would think that we'd want to get on the same page here. The president's made really clear he prefers one big bill, as he said. So I haven't heard from our leadership. I hope that our leadership and the House leadership are going to get synced up here, because really, I mean, it's the end of February now.
Senate Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader John Thune, acknowledged that they were caught off guard by the president's comments.
Ultimately, everybody, I think, is in the same place, that we want to be able to deliver for the American people. President Trump campaigned on these priorities, whether one bill or two. I'm confident we'll get there.
The Senate was expected to vote on their version of the budget resolution this Thursday. The Senate's version does not include the president's request of extending the Trump-era tax cuts or increasing the debt ceiling. Democrats are cut off from the process and have little influence over the drafting of the reconciliation bill.
The big picture here is that they are trying to pass a budget reconciliation bill that will allow them to strip trillions of dollars in benefits from middle America in order to put it towards a big tax cut.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is expected to put the House's version of the budget resolution for a vote on the House floor next week. The House's version expects to have $1.5 trillion of spending cuts and $4.5 trillion allocated for the Trump tax cuts. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Democrat lawmakers join researchers and union workers outside HHS headquarters. They're demanding that the Trump administration end its funding freeze at government agencies and, quote, respect union workers' contracts. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more from Washington, D.C.
Hey, hey, RFK, hands off the FDA!
Representatives Jamie Raskin and Glenn Ivey and Senator Chris Van Hollen joined workers and researchers outside of the Health and Human Services headquarters on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. They spoke against actions taken by the Trump administration and specifically targeted Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Elon Musk. The lawmakers say that Musk is pushing to, quote, gut federal services and impose mass layoffs.
The research that you're doing is making a difference. We're all counting on you to continue to have a chance to work. And that's why we're here to fight the administration to make sure we can continue allowing you all to do the basic research that we need to save lives.
They say their demands are no cuts to vital services, no mass layoffs, and end the funding freeze. Since President Trump took office, his administration has taken actions ranging from freezing certain federal funds to canceling contracts. One of the most notable efforts has been DOGE, which has been auditing federal agencies with the mission to cut waste and fraud.
And there's no sugarcoating this. These cuts will kill more Americans.
The rally comes a day after newly confirmed Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gave his first address to HHS staff.
I'm not going to come in here and impose my belief over any of yours. Instead, we're going to work together to launch a new era of radical transparency. I've come through a very highly polarized confirmation process. The fog of narrative warfare has made it hard to get a sense of who I am and what I believe and what I represent.
Kennedy was confirmed by the Senate last week. His confirmation process was one of the most contentious and polarizing of Trump's cabinet nominations. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Jason Blair, NTD News.
Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, officials now have accounts for the IRS and the SEC on the social media platform X. Now they're asking for help from the public, and President Trump is calling on both chambers of Congress to pass the House version of the budget plan over the Senate version. Joining me now to discuss these latest developments is tax policy attorney Rosemary Becky. Rosemary, great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. President Trump is endorsing the House GOP's budget plan instead of the Senate's. Why, and what do you think is the most likely outcome at this point?
So this is a really interesting dynamic.
The president very much wants to get some wins on the board, and he very much wants to advance his agenda. One big, beautiful bill is very hard to do, particularly in the House, because their margins are so slim. So the package includes things like, raising the debt ceiling, and it only includes passing $4.5 trillion worth of tax cuts, which is actually what it costs to extend the tax cuts for 10 years. And that doesn't include the cost of making other changes, such as things that are on his priority list. So the Senate, as you pointed out, has taken a different approach, and they're looking to do a smaller package, get some of the president's priorities done very quickly, and leave tax for later in the year so that there's more time to debate it.
And politically, how do you interpret the back and forth over the budget and Trump weighing in?
So I think it's a matter of the president really stressing to both the House and the Senate that we've got to get something done. And I think that he's urging them to do it. And he's trying to get them to do it, particularly in one bill. But I think at the end of the day, it'll be a matter of actually which way is faster. Is two bills faster than one? As you can imagine, the bigger the one bill gets, the longer it's going to take to work out the differences between the House and the Senate. So it's arguable that, doing two bills might actually be more efficient and more effective and get done quicker.
Mm-hmm. President Trump earlier was just speaking at a meeting of financial and tech leaders. Here's a clip.
The best and most successful business leaders on earth are now racing to invest in the United States. Since November, DMAC has announced plans to invest $40 billion in the U.S., creating at least 10,000 jobs. SoftBank has announced investments of between $100 and $200 billion, creating at least 100,000 American jobs.
Rosemary, if we could just point to a few things, what is causing the influx of investment, and long term, what will the impact be here?
Frankly, a breath of fresh air and talking about real change and real efficiencies in our government. And I think there's excitement. And I think there's excitement about what's happening here in the United States.
Now, DOGE is aiming to cut about $1 trillion from the federal deficit. Here's a clip from Elon Musk.
The massive waste, fraud, and abuse that has been going on, which is leading to a $2 trillion a year deficit. That's what the president was handed on Jan 20th, a $2 trillion deficit. It's insane.
Now, how feasible is it to find $1 trillion in fraud and abuse, or will this goal necessitate scaling down some federal government operations?
I think it's very feasible that they are going to find $1 trillion worth of cuts. And in fact, in the House budget resolution, it calls for them to find $1.5 trillion worth of cuts. And I think that, as they continue to look at programs, at all the agencies and what's been gone on over the years, that they will be successful in finding those cuts. And frankly, I think that's what the American people want. And so, initially they talked about $2 trillion. $2 trillion might be a little bit more difficult, but I certainly think that with some of the things that they've talked about already, that they found that $1 trillion, that will be able to find those savings.
Yeah, I'd take $1 trillion. Now, DOGE is now setting its sights on the IRS. Now, this hits a little bit closer to home for many Americans. What's DOGE looking into at the IRS?
So an agent really needs some help, right? You talk to any of your friends and they'll tell you tales of trying to call the IRS and get some help and get answers, and nobody's there to answer their calls, or they get all sorts of different answers and stuff. So we all know that there's some efficiencies that can be done there, but in particular at the IRS. And so, I think that it's only natural that, the DOGE takes a look at the IRS along with some of those other agencies.
Rosemary, Becky, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Turning now to the South China Sea. The State Department today condemning a Chinese helicopter maneuver. It nearly collided with a Philippine patrol plane. The event took place above the disputed Scarborough Shoal off northwestern Philippines. In a public statement, the State Department calls China's move unsafe and irresponsible. Officials reiterated the U.S.'s commitment to, quote, ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. On Tuesday, a Chinese Navy helicopter flew within 10 feet of a Philippine patrol jet, forcing the Philippine pilot to issue a warning. Now, in recent years, tensions have escalated in the region as China ramps up its territorial assertions. This comes as the Philippines is strengthening its ties with allied nations like the U.S., Japan, and Australia. And coming up, the Department of Government Efficiency's efforts to slash government spending and reduce the size of the federal workforce is facing several challenges legally. Now, we have a legal analyst unpack what's at the core of these lawsuits.
Funny expression. There's a little scar right below his neck. The artist, on a trip to somewhere in South America, he met this kid who told him a story about himself. The technique is really good. As you'll see, like in the foreground, there's water on his face. The texture is so realistic, but then sort of in the back, you have these washed out colors, almost sort of fantasy feel. The whole of the picture is very balanced, and you still get that sense of harmony and warm light from it. The artist, he was really moved by the child's spirit. The child's from the slums, and so he looks around and he sees people who either get into drugs or they get into gangs, and he doesn't want that for himself. So he was telling this artist about how he's going to make a better life for himself. The immense spirit and determination that the kid had really stuck with the guy, so that's why he painted such a large portrait of the child.
Many of us have been child fighters, but this little kid learned to defend himself in his own way. It's a great sacrifice that way. And so this is another form of strength, another form of endurance. We are capable of much more than we think.
Say goodbye to harsh, bitter coffee and hello to a delicious, smooth brew. With specialty quality beans, expertly roasted in-house, you'll taste the difference with every sip. Fermented with a blend of 50 enzymes, Days Coffee delivers a rich brew like no other. Made with the highest grade specialty beans available, you're sure to taste the difference. Elevate your morning with Days Enzyme Fermented Coffee.
What I thought was a complete life was nowhere near complete. But it is now.
Learn about adopting a teen at adoptuskids.org.
Welcome back. I'm Jack Bradley. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, is working to downsize the federal workforce and slash government spending. That's as it seeks access to government data to do so. Joining me to discuss the multiple lawsuits seeking to prevent DOGE from accessing government data is civil rights attorney Areva Martin. Riva Martin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jack.
Now, a federal judge is weighing whether to block mass federal layoffs and the buyouts that Trump offered, which 75,000 workers accepted. Unions argue that the cuts override Congress's authority and that this will lead to a loss of revenue and influence for them. The DOJ says that this restructuring is part of the job of the president, not infringing on the law. How do you see this case playing out?
Well, this is one of many cases that have been filed in federal court challenging DOGE and some of the actions that it has taken since Donald Trump has come into office. We've seen a mixed bag of results regarding cases filed against the president and his efforts to, in his words, reshape and remake our government. A lot of these cases fringe on the Privacy Act of 1974. That law prohibits or limits how the federal government can collect, use, and share information about U.S. citizens and other people in the United States. Most of the lawsuits that have been filed against DOGE and against the president have relied on that act. And it remains to be seen how far federal courts are willing to stretch an interpretation of that act to give Donald Trump, Elon Musk, unfettered access to records of employees, and in this case, to carry out the act of actually terminating employees, many of whom are Secret Service employees who have due process rights, union contracts, and other legal protections that otherwise would have to be highly considered before any move could be made to terminate them from their federal employment.
Mm-hmm. Well, in several different cases, we have judges holding the firings of executives, particularly the DEI executives, also heads of agencies by the Trump administration. I want to play this soundbite from Fox interviews, Hannity's interview with Trump and Elon Musk just last night and get your reaction.
If the will of the president is not implemented, and the president is representative of the people, that means the will of the people is not being implemented. And that means we don't live in a democracy, we live in a bureaucracy.
So there we heard Elon Musk. What's your reaction here?
That's an incredibly absurd statement, and it completely ignores the three co-equal branches of government that make up our democracy. It's not just the presidency, it's not just the executive office that should be of consideration. It is also the other two co-equal branches of government, i.e. the judiciary and the Congress. And many of the actions and the steps that Elon Musk and Donald Trump have taken completely eviscerate rights and privileges that have been traditionally, and not just traditionally, but afforded to Congress by our Constitution. So yes, the president does have some power, but what we have seen is an unprecedented use, and some would argue even abuse of power by Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems that some of these cases, at least one, was blocked by a federal judge just yesterday, where Tanya Chutkan denied a request from 14 states to stop DOGE's access to data at 7 federal agencies. The state says that DOGE could use the data to lay off thousands of employees. Now, does this set a precedent for future cases, do you think?
Well, I don't think we should read too much into the order by Judge Chutkan. What she did was she denied a temporary restraining order because she said the plaintiffs had not shown irreparable harm. But she made it very clear in a footnote that she had serious questions about the unfettered power and access of someone like Elon Musk, who's not been vetted, who's not been approved by the congressional branch of our government. So I don't think this case should be taken as a sign or a signal of any sorts that Elon Musk is going to have unfettered access to sensitive and private records of millions and millions of Americans.
What's the concern of DOGE accessing the data here?
Very many concerns. One, the violation of the Privacy Act of 1974, which limits how the federal government can collect and share private information about U.S. citizens, but also the possibility and the very real probability, I should say, of identity theft and fraud related to the release of private records, particularly when you start talking about tax records. At this point, it appears that DOGE employees or the DOGE team will have access to very sensitive IRS documents, your tax returns, your social security number, information about your employment history, your earnings history. That is information that before Donald Trump took office this second time and before Elon Musk became the unofficial president, those records were highly coveted, highly protected, and only made available in very rare instances to individuals outside of these various departments.
Ariva Martin, thank you so much for your insight here today.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to go bring in former federal prosecutor and legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Zach Smith, to offer his analysis on this. Zach, thank you so much for joining us. For many of the lawsuits against DOGE, it hinges on whether DOGE is violating privacy rights. How concerning is it that DOGE is accessing this government data?
Well, thank you for having me on the show this evening. And look, I think to understand all of the lawsuits against DOGE, all of the complaints that are being made in the mainstream media, we have to take a step back because fundamentally the courts and we as the American people are being asked to decide who should control the executive branch of our federal government. Should it be the duly enacted president, or should it be unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats who man the career civil service in many of these agencies? And what Donald Trump and his legal team are rightly saying is that Article 2 of the Constitution vests the president and the president alone with the executive power of the United States. And so whomever the president chooses to hire or fire to carry out his policies and his prerogatives, that is solely within the president's domain. And unfortunately, over the past half century or more, we have gotten away from that fundamental constitutional idea. And fortunately, Donald Trump and his legal team at the Justice Department are prepared to reassert the original understanding of Article 2 of the Constitution.
Zach, many are concerned that DOGE may be making these cuts too unilaterally. Does DOGE need the approval of Congress to make these cuts? And also, have there been any precedents for this in the past?
Well, I think we've certainly seen prior presidents take actions when they first come into office to temporarily pause certain programs to understand how certain types of money are being sent. We've certainly seen precedent before where presidents have offered buyouts to certain federal employees or to restructure the federal workforce in some certain respects. Now, I think it's clear DOGE is moving at a much quicker, much larger scale than many of these prior efforts. But again, a lot of this comes down to about the president's power to control the executive branch of government. And I think if you listen to what Donald Trump and his other spokespeople have said, is that unfortunately, many folks who currently staff the career civil servants either have explicitly said they disagree with Donald Trump's policy priorities or have implicitly made clear they're not going to effectively and efficiently carry out the orders from the political appointees in those branches of government. So again, these efforts are not only appropriate, in many cases, they're long overdue.
President Trump is facing lawsuits. DOGE is facing lawsuits over this. President Trump recently fired about a dozen inspectors general who are responsible for reporting fraud, waste, and abuse at federal agencies. They're suing, saying that Trump didn't follow proper protocol in firing them. Here's the recently fired inspector general from USAID on this. Take a look.
I think the concept of independent, aggressive oversight via in-house inspector generals is at a tipping point. And I think that this should be an alarm to all Americans, but in particular Congress.
So Zach, are these inspector generals, this position, this role, is it going to, the future of it, they're concerned that it won't remain independent. What do you think?
Well, let's make a couple of points clear. First, Congress still has authority to conduct very aggressive oversight of many of these agencies, and I suspect we'll see more of that going forward. And two, the idea that there could be certain executive branch officials that are independent from the head of the executive branch, the President of the United States, is utterly something that was unknown to the framers of our Constitution. And so if you listen to a lot of the arguments that are making their way to the Supreme Court, some that are already there, essentially the court is being asked to reconsider a case from the New Deal era called Humphrey's Executor that said Congress could impose for-cause restrictions on the ability of the president to hire and fire, mostly fire, certain individuals. And so I think, again, Donald Trump and his Justice Department are right to tackle that bad precedent head on.
One other big concern here is that the DOGE will have Americans' IRS data, the tax data, and Social Security data. Is that a real concern here for DOGE to be accessing that?
No, it's not. Look, I don't think the IRS or other government agencies have been the model of keeping Americans' data safe and secure, unfortunately, for many of us as Americans. The other thing I would say again is that DOGE and Elon Musk and the others who are spearheading this effort are doing so at the direction of the President of the United States. And so, for purposes of gaining access to certain information, certain data, it's absurd to say that the President or the individuals that he appoints to act on his behalf should not have access to this information.
Zach Smith, thank you very much for your insights here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me on.
Coming up, from rising egg prices to cutting federal spending, we hear from folks in D.C. about their confidence in President Trump's handling of the economy and government transparency.
I'm Jonathan Lawson. If you're 50 to 85, please listen closely. The lock I want to talk to you about isn't the one on your door. It's a rate lock for your life insurance that guarantees that once you're insured, your rate can never go up at any time for any reason. Many policies you see don't have one, but you can get a lifetime rate lock from Colonial Penn. This plan was designed for people on a fixed income with coverage options that start at $9.95 a month. That's less than 35 cents a day. Your rate is locked in for life. Coverage can never be canceled, and your acceptance is guaranteed. You cannot be turned down because of your health. See for yourself. Call for an information kit and gift. Both are free with no obligation.
Call 1-800-624-6556 for your free information and your free gift. That's 1-800-624-6556. 1-800-624-6556. Call now.
This past year has been one of the hardest in MyPillow's history. It's because of you that we're making it through. My employees and I want to thank you for your continued support by extending our wholesale prices on classic MyPillows. Get standard classic MyPillows only $14.98. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.98. But it gets even better. Upgrade to a queen size MyPillow for just $18.98. King size only $1 more. Get my body pillows $29.98 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of these wholesale prices, including my standard size MyPillow, originally $49.98, now only $14.98. Queens $18.98, Kings only $1 more. Not only that, order $75 or more, ship absolutely free.
From all of us here at MyPillow, thanks America!
Welcome back. Are everyday Americans confident that President Trump can lower inflation and increase government transparency? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
So obviously right now we're seeing egg prices going up. Do you have confidence in President Trump's ability to tackle that issue?
I do not. I don't think he's going to be able to do anything about egg prices. I don't think that the middle class is going to benefit at all from any of these policies.
I mean, after his last administration, gas prices were super low. And obviously the pandemic happened, so everything rose. But, I do have hope that the price will drop at some point. I'm in college right now. I'm a senior, so I live off of eggs. So it's definitely tough for me right now.
I'm not confident in anything that Trump has to do, honestly, realistically. I'm just maneuvering life in the world just like day by day, hoping like it goes down.
I'm very confident in it because we were in such a bad position to start with. It's just going to take time to get it straightened out.
Under the former administration of President Biden, the egg prices went up. They just skyrocketed, really.
I think if anything, we're going to see the prices go up before they come back down. It's going to take a little bit of time for the new administration to fix what the last administration put in place.
So yesterday, President Trump signed a memo that would require federal agencies to disclose all potential waste, fraud, and abuses. So what do you think about the administration's efforts to do that right now?
Like I said, they're finding a lot of the wasteful spending. If half of the stuff is true that we're finding out about, then cut it all.
I think right now he's talking about fraud and waste and all these other things, and he hasn't said what it is. I'd like to see. I'm sure that there's inefficiencies out there. I think everybody realizes that it needs to be looked at. But what is it? Why won't he tell us what it is?
I did see that he had President Trump had a press conference about the quote unquote fraud of the last administration, of what they were buying, stuff like that. So I do have hope that he'll write that.
Their efforts is too short, too soon. I think that they're trying to. I don't know what they're trying to do. I don't know what they're trying to do.
The money needs to be put into a place where it can help the American people and other countries.
Those of us that work every day, the taxes are getting higher and higher, and for what? And some of the stuff they've listed, it makes you wonder why it's even been spent.
Now you're up to date on the Capitol Report. I'm Jack Bradley. Have a nice evening, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.